All right, if you're tackling your WSET Level 3, you know Bordeaux is a real beast. So let's break this massive region down piece by piece and really nail the key concepts you've got to know for that exam.
Okay, so let's jump right in with a huge question. And honestly, the answer to this is the key to unlocking the entire region. It gets right to the heart of what Bordeaux is all about. So the simplest way to think about it is this. Blending is basically an insurance policy. The weather in Bordeaux, it's just so unpredictable. Relying on just one grape is a massive gamble. So by blending, winemakers can smooth out the rough edges of a bad year and create a consistent, balanced, and delicious wine, vintage after vintage.
So here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll get into the climate challenge. Then we'll talk about the famous tale of two banks. We'll touch on the amazing whites and sweet wines and wrap it all up by making sense of those tricky classifications. Okay, first things first. If you want to understand the wine in the bottle, you have to start with the weather. Seriously, every single decision a winemaker in Bordeaux makes is a reaction to the climate. So the textbook definition is a moderate maritime climate. What does that actually mean? Well, moderate is good, no crazy hot or cold swings. But that maritime part, that's the tricky bit. It means you're right next to the Atlantic Ocean. And that means rain is pretty much a threat all year long.
And yeah, that rain is the source of pretty much every winemaker's nightmare. If it comes in the spring, it can mess up flowering, which means fewer grapes. If it comes right before harvest, the grapes can get bloated with water, diluting all those beautiful flavors. And all that humidity, it's just the perfect setup for nasty stuff like mildew and rot. This is exactly why you hear so much about vintage variation in Bordeaux. No 2 years are the same. But hey, it's not all doom and gloom. Bordeaux has a couple of secret weapons on its side. First, you've got the Gulf Stream. This warm ocean current basically extends the growing season, giving the grapes more time to ripen and, crucially, helping to fight off those killer spring frosts. Then there's this huge forest, the Landes forest, which acts like a giant natural wall, protecting the vineyards from the nastiest storms blowing in from the Atlantic.
Okay, now for the main event, the big story of Bordeaux. You really can't get a grip on the red wines here without understanding this one massive divide. A divide created by its rivers. It's truly a tale of two completely different personalities.
So you've got this big body of water, the Gironde estuary, which is fed by two rivers, the Garonne and the Dordogne. And together they literally slice the region in half. On the west side, you've got the left bank. On the east, you have the right bank. And this isn't just a line on a map. It changes everything. The soil, the main grape they grow, and the final style of the wine.
And here's a fact that you absolutely need to remember for the exam, and it's one that trips a lot of people up. You know, we always think of Bordeaux and Cabernet Sauvignon, right? It gets all the fame, but the most planted grape in the entire region, by a long shot, is actually Merlot. It makes up something like 60% of all the red grapes.
Okay, seriously? This slide right here, this is your WSE3 cheat sheet for Bordeaux. If you memorize this, you are golden. Left bank, think gravel, think Cabernet Sauvignon, think powerful, structured wines. Right bank, think clay, think Merlot, think softer, plummier, more approachable wines. That's the fundamental split. All right, let's zoom in on the left bank, the west side of the river. We're talking about places like the Medoc and Graves. This is where those world-famous, powerful Cabernet Sauvignon wines come from, and it's all thanks to a very specific kind of ground. So, what is the left bank's secret? It's the soil. It's these deep, deep beds of gravel. First off, in a place that gets a lot of rain, gravel is amazing for drainage. The vines don't get wet feet. But here's the real magic. Those gravel stones act like little radiators. They soak up the sun's heat all day and then radiate it back up to the grapes at night. And for a late ripening grape like Cabernet Sauvignon, that little bit of extra warmth is absolutely critical to get it perfectly ripe. And that combo, Cabernet Sauvignon plus gravel, creates a really specific style of wine. We're talking full-bodied, high tannin, high acidity. The classic flavor is blackcurrant or cassis. And when they age, oh man, they develop these incredible notes of cedar and tobacco and cigar box. These wines are built to last for decades.
Now, for your exam, you have got to know these names. These are the big-ticket appellations on the left bank. In the Medoc, moving from north to south, you've got Saint-Estèphe, Pauillac, Saint-Julien, and Margaux. Then, a little further south in the Graves area, the top spot is Pessac-Léognan.
All right, let's hop across the river.
Welcome to the right bank. And trust me, it's a completely different world over here. Different grape, different soil, and a totally different style of wine.
So, on the right bank, instead of gravel, the dominant soils are clay and limestone. Now, clay does the opposite of gravel. It holds on to water and stays much cooler. And guess what? That is the perfect home for Merlot. See, Merlot ripens earlier than Cabernet, so it doesn't need all that extra heat. The cooler clay soils keep it happy and balanced, letting it get ripe and fruity without the alcohol going through the roof.
So what kind of wine does this make? Well, these Merlot dominant blends are still pretty full-bodied, but the tannins are just softer, plusher. You don't get that same aggressive structure as the left bank. The flavors lean more towards red fruits, think ripe plum and red berries. And one of the best parts? They're often delicious and ready to drink much, much sooner than those big, powerful cabs from across the water.
And the two absolute superstars of the right bank you need to know are Saint-Emilion and Pomerol. These two spots are home to some of the most luxurious, sought-after, and most expensive Merlot wines on the planet.
Now, even though the red wines get all the attention, Bordeaux is definitely not a one-trick pony. It also makes some absolutely world-class dry white wines, and arguably the most famous sweet wines in existence. So, what's the magic behind these incredible sweet wines? Well, it's a fungus. I know, sounds weird, right? It's called Botrytis cinerea, but we call it noble rot. And the region has these perfect misty autumn mornings down by the rivers that allow this special fungus to settle on the grapes.
So this noble rot is amazing. It creates these tiny little punctures in the grape skin, which lets the water inside evaporate out. So what's left behind? Just a super concentrated little grape full of sugar, acid, and flavor. Plus, the rot itself adds these incredible new flavors. Things like honey, apricot, and orange marmalade. The star grape for this is Semillon, mainly because its thin skin makes it a perfect target for the rot.
Okay, key appellations to remember. For the sweet wines, the big one is Sauternes and its neighbor Barsac. For the really top-quality dry whites, we're talking those beautiful, often barrel-fermented blends of Sauvignon Blanc and Semillon. You look to Pessac-Léognan again. And for your everyday, crisp, zesty, unoaked whites, the go-to spot is Entrée du Mers. And finally, you can't talk about Bordeaux without talking about the classifications. They're famous, they can be a little confusing, so let's try and make sense of the most important ones. Okay, for the exam, the most important thing is to understand the difference between the two main systems. First, you have the famous 1855 classification. Think of it as a historical snapshot of the Médoc. It was based on the price of the wines back in 1855, and it has barely changed since. It's basically set in stone. Then you have the Saint-Emilion classification, which is the total opposite. It's a living, breathing system that gets reviewed about every 10 years. This means chateaux can get promoted or demoted, which, as you can imagine, causes a lot of drama. And that brings us right back to where we started. Honestly, if you remember just one thing from all of this, make it this. Bordeaux is all about the blend. Blending is the soul of this region. It's the tool winemakers use to fight the weather, to balance out the different grapes, and to create something truly special. So I'll leave you with this one last thought. For hundreds of years, the #1 struggle in Bordeaux was just getting the grapes ripe enough. But with the climate changing and things getting warmer, that's not really the problem anymore. So the big question is, does the classic Bordeaux blend itself have to change to survive? To keep that famous elegance and balance? That's the challenge facing the next generation of winemakers.